My name is Burt, and I am an equine dentist. My presentation is called the Equine Mouth and Natural Balance Dentistry. The new term for it is neuromuscular dentistry. It's the same thing. They've just named it a little bit differently recently. I have been an equine dentist for 14 years. I got into this because I worked with a vet who was a chiropractor who did chiropractic and acupuncture on horses. And she said, you know, I need somebody who does dentistry this specific way because it enhances how the body moves, it enhances how they masticate their food, it enhances their temperament, it enhances everything. Because you think about yourself, if you're going to do something, and I chew gum a lot to keep my jaw relaxed, but balance and horizon is in the horse's head. And the TMJ joint, which is right here on the horse, is the most heavily innervated nerve or joint in the horse's body. So if they're going to move or they're doing anything, they're gonna grit their teeth, you know, just like we do if we're going to do something. Like when I'm working, I chew gum so I don't grit my teeth because it's very physical. And if I'm gritting my teeth and I'm tense, the instrument going into the horse's mouth is tense. They're a prey animal, not a predator. So a horse's teeth are called hypsodont. So that means that, and this is a great illustration that shows you they're about 4 inches long. That has to last them their whole life. So hypsodont means short crown, long root. Well, opposite. Long crowns with short roots. So this actually, right down here, is the root. And the way that they erupt out is by masticating their food. So as they're masticating and chewing their food, that wears their teeth, and then they start to erupt. Humans, cats and dogs, have brachiodont teeth, which means short crowns with long roots. So when humans, cats, and dogs, their teeth come in, that's it. You know, they don't move unless, you know, until we get older and they fall out. Horses' teeth are constantly erupting. What happens with typical dentistry is they're mostly focusing on the molars. So they're removing teeth here, but leaving these. And if they can't touch their molars, that means it's like if you did your front teeth like this and you can't get your molars to touch. So then they're not able to masticate their food very well. They don't have balance, and they also don't erupt correctly because they're not touching. They're not able to wear them correctly. So horses can have up to 42 teeth, and that would include, they don't have a picture of it here, but wolf teeth are typically right here. Males typically have canines, top and bottom on either side. They have 4 arcades. So as you're looking at the mouth, you're looking at the horse's mouth, arcade 1 is upper right, arcade 2 is upper left, arcade 3 is lower left, and this is on the horse. And then arcade 4 is lower right of the horse's head as they're looking towards you. So it's split in half. I'll show you on Bertha here. This is Big Bertha. She's missing one of her incisors over on this side, but so split down the middle, there's 3 incisors and then 6 molars. 3 incisors, 6 molars, and then the same on the bottom. And this is a good illustration too of how thin this nasal bone is and why it's super important not to put the halter and bridle and all that down here. Because if you look down the line, a lot of these guys are broken off because it's such a thin bone. So this is a draft mare, and you can see how large her teeth are. People are always talking about sharp edges. Some dentists call them points. If you can see, the teeth have ridges. They've got 3 ridges in them that stick out beyond the surface area. That's where the sharp points come. Because there isn't anything to wear them, because they hang outside the bottom teeth. And every horse is that way. This is this way, you know, the lower is thinner and the upper jaw hangs out over. So they're always gonna get points. It doesn't matter what you do. That's just how they're made. This is a male. So here are the canine teeth. Right here. And these are fighting teeth for in the wild. So I adjust these teeth in domestication because they don't need to be fighting and using those teeth. And look, you can see how long this one is. So when I adjust them more down to this level so that they've got motion. When they're at this level, this hangs up motion because it will get locked in toward the upper teeth. This is another good example of, so this horse is missing part of the teeth up top. This is a really large back hook. This is a protuberant area in the middle. So the teeth, since they erupt, anywhere there isn't anything exactly on top of it to wear it, whatever part of the tooth that's opposing is going to grow past it. So if there was an S shape of a hole maybe on the top, there would be an S shape on the bottom growing up into the hole. And I found that, and it's amazing to me. But these are the things that people don't realize are happening, and then you hear about people getting bucked off, or all of a sudden the horse did this or this, and then they usually find pathology like that inside the mouth. And here are the arcades. They're all numbered. So you start with the upper incisor. That's the first arcade, second arcade. They don't all have wolf teeth. They don't all have the canines. A lot of females do have canines. I was working on a 20-year-old sorrel quarter horse, and she had really big canines like this male. Normally they're really small. And looking underneath, I'm like, are you sure this is a female? And they're like, yeah, but she acts like a male. So I'm wondering, in those cases, maybe those horses have a little more testosterone, those females. And I've got forms, if you guys want to take, that show this. And this is how you can see, I thought this was a neat illustration that shows you skull placement inside the head. And again, talking about halters and bridles and stuff. Be careful of where you're placing that. So in the wild, people always ask me, in the wild, what do they do? Part of it is what they're eating that wears their teeth, but most of it is motion. We're not feeding them in a nice soft pile right here in front of their face. They're on the run. They're turning their head. They're bending down. They're bending up. So they're wearing their mouth in all different ways. Instead of, like I said, here's my soft pile, and I don't even have to look around to do it. Sure, part of it is they're getting maybe a mouthful of sand or some rocks or some sagebrush or something that's a little more coarse. I tease and say in domestication, the best way to wear their teeth is if they get a dry tumbleweed or something. That would be the only thing, but movement is the key. I mean, their feet get worn naturally that way, their bodies are better, their minds are better. I mean, these creatures are made to move long distances. So, and then also, people are always asking me, eventually horses' teeth wear out in domestication. And in the wild, a typical domestic horse lifespan is 25 to 30 years, but there's some in domestication that live to like 40 or older. But they've been known to live as long as 61 years. Wild horses and horses living in the wild, like Mustangs, tend to have a shorter lifespan, but have been known to live up to 36 years. So probably the ones that lived to 36 years, one had fantastic genetics as far as teeth went, and or two, they were probably in a nice climate where they maybe were able to have green grass all the time. Because as they age and as they lose their teeth, this one is a good example, and in domestication, like she's missing. So you can tell this was all backfilled in right here. So as the teeth erupt out, it fills in naturally. So if you're pulling a tooth, like if they have an abscessed tooth, and you have to pull this much out, they've got to pack that, they've got to fill that up. But as they age, it just wears out, and it wears down. But what does she have to eat with? Nothing. She's got her bottoms here, but nothing to grind with any longer. And unfortunately, what Mother Nature has done to these guys, so in domestication, since they're not able to fend for themselves, we have to figure out how to feed them. When I first got horses as an adult, I bought one of those handy dandy feeders that was the V-shaped, up off the ground with the bucket, because I lived in a place that had sand, and I had gotten a horse from Rifle, and the first thing he did was rip the hay out and throw it on the ground. And I was very upset with him. I was like, I just bought you this feeder. But he's like, lady, you don't know what you're talking about. This is how I'm supposed to eat. So this is how they are supposed to eat, with their heads down. That's how they're geared to eat. That's how they're made, to nip with the incisors, be able to masticate and chew all the way through those molars to be able to get the hay down to the consistency that it needs to be. This is like what I did. You can just run through these. These are just all examples of what we're doing. Okay, so in this case, it's lower. That's nice, but look what he's doing with his head. So with feeders that are hung on the wall, they're turning a certain way every time to eat. So that's wearing their teeth that certain way every time, and that's also doing something to their body, head, neck, pole. And it actually wears into their bones. You know, we've got Diane Weidner has a skeleton that can show you from the mouth, from the skull, where it has actually worn into the bones of the body. Again, same thing. It's a nice concept, not the best concept, because they are going to have tooth pathology and body differences because of that. This is a better idea because their heads are down. The only thing it's kind of hard with the nets is if they have shoes on. They can get caught in those. Same thing, pillow. I do like the pillows, I think the next one is like that, because they're not getting caught in them as much, and it's head down. Another way, so this is a good idea except for the grate. If there would be a way to drill a hole through the bucket and then put the net, anchor the net in there, that would probably be the best. I had a horse that I worked with up in the mountains, and he had a horrible diagonal, which meant his front teeth were like this, and then he had a curve, a complete curve out of the teeth, and I was like, what is he cribbing on? And they're like, well, he doesn't crib, we live in the mountains, he walks around and does. I said, okay, what are you feeding him out of? And it was out of a homemade feeder that this is more like shelf material. And so he had pushed on the bar part to get through the hay, and that complete bar section wore out his teeth almost completely through. So slow feeders are great because otherwise they eat their food too fast and then they get into trouble because they're bored, but you have to be careful with what you're doing. This is one, this isn't the one, but this is one where that had happened. And there were a couple of cases where they were almost worn all the way through. That's how they're supposed to eat. So this is a good site. This is on Facebook. Horses Inside and Out, and they do that anatomy book that has all the colors and stuff. So we're on a mission. Let's get rid of high hay nets, high hay racks, and high feed bowls for the good of the horse. Feeding horses off the floor is so good for their back posture. So she's talking about it on the body side, not just the teeth. Musculature as well as respiratory and digestive health. And then humans have a multitude of reasons on how to feed the equine. This stance is how they've evolved. That's how they're supposed to eat. And then anything else disrupts what nature has created. Again, here's an older horse that shows the uppers have worn out. And what happens is, so these wear out, these try to go up into this space, but there's nothing to grind here. These don't touch here. These don't touch here. There isn't anything that touches. There is no way to be able to masticate the hay properly. This is an older horse. Again, with the red puffy gums, this horse could have also needed some immune support. And I usually recommend Equident, which is a mushroom matrix for horses, especially any older horses. Yeah.
Question, why are those?
So those have just worn out, and she was like missing this over here. She was not being fed properly either. This horse actually, a couple of people got a hold of her and her herd mate during the fire, most recent fire. And they were just feeding them beet pulp. That was it. So probably no pre and probiotics, none of that stuff. And then just bad tooth health and bad everything, unfortunately. And this is another one. This was the herd mate. So the gums are so far receded, you could just probably pick those teeth right out. So they're not functional. And when the horse is trying to eat, those teeth are moving. So how uncomfortable is that? Every bite, nobody had looked at those teeth in a long time. Yeah.
Is that why they're crooked? Is because the gums are receded so much?
Well, so a lot of them have fallen out. Also because they're that long, obviously they've never been adjusted. That doesn't surprise me because most practitioners don't do the front teeth because they're just not taught to do that.
Would you do anything to train them?
At this point, they were moving, so I would just take them out. They're just not functional at all. And there's not even anything on the top to be able to work with. There's not one tooth in there that matches up. Yeah. So there will be no nipping in the hay, you know.
No matter what.
Yeah, no matter what. And they were probably over 25. I mean, they were probably maybe close to 30. I didn't actually see them. We took pictures and sent them to me. What do we do? I said, well, if they're moving, just take them out, you know, because they're not helping the horse, and they're probably hindering the horse trying to eat because they're moving every time they're trying to take a bite.
And
Yeah.
we're looking at bottom teeth and then
Yeah,
one top
those are the
tooth.
bottoms,
Okay.
and those are what's left on the top. So the first two teeth would have been here. This is the second, and then this is the last one, and you can see it's about to come out of the gum up at the top there. And these were just moving. There's probably barely any holding on. I mean, the gums actually do a pretty good job of holding on to them, but not functional for sure.
And this is like this not just because of age, but also because of there was no care and maybe,
Right.
health. I mean,
And
nutrition all that.
unfortunately, because when you get into the older ages, you're running out of root base anyway. So when I see a horse at this stage, or maybe, say maybe 5 years earlier, there's not a lot I can do, because there's not a lot of root left. I can do enough to make them comfortable, and that's what I do, enough to get motion, and to make the TMJ comfortable. It's risk versus benefit with older horses. I've heard of practitioners who people worry because they can't eat hay anymore. Well, I can't bring their teeth back. All I can do is work with what they have and make them as efficient as possible with what they have. So it's a fine line with what can you do. So if those teeth were solid, I would do what I could to make an even surface so at least they could slide, but they're still not functional.
Right.
But I do get people who haven't had their horse's teeth done in 10 years or something like that, and the incisors are so overgrown, and if they're older, there's only so much you can do. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you pull those teeth out, they can't eat hay anymore, even with the molars? Or
No,
would you
they
be-
can.
They can.
If-
They're just using their lips.
right, which are super strong. So,
Right.
yeah, so yeah, they can get those up in there. And here's another case. I just saw one, and I should have taken a picture and gotten it into the presentation. A person bought a horse. They were told it was a parrot mouth, but it wasn't a big deal.
There was a what?
A parrot mouth. So that's where there's a big overhang, and the lower is set back. But I needed braces when I was younger. I got a parrot mouth. So, but for me, they pulled my teeth back and aligned everything. Horses don't get horsey braces. So it was so far like this that the bottom incisors were touching the roof of the mouth, not functional at all. And she was 7. And again, this person had bought the horse from a different state. They told her about it, but it wasn't a big deal. This horse was racing. She was 7. Beautiful girl. Bones. She was probably a 2 score when I saw her, and she had already put weight on her, and they were racing her. So she told me, well, she's got a little bit of a parrot mouth. And she opened her mouth, and I was like, oh my gosh, and I've been doing this for 14 years. So when I say oh my gosh, it's an oh my gosh. And just completely not functional in the front. And then when I finally got back to the molar, so all you can do when you get something like that, because it's not functional, I can't pull that back and get them on top of each other, is bring them down as far as you can so they can try to move. So, anterior, posterior, and laterally. But I cannot change the fact that these were sitting here. I mean, you could take the teeth with the gum line, basically. And then when I got back to her molars, and then so she cribs on top of it. Well, she's trying to fix herself because she's in a lot of discomfort. So when I got back into the molars, it was like her head was completely mismatched. Her molar teeth, and she was a thin thoroughbred, thinly built. Her molars were huge. It was like she had draft teeth in her little thoroughbred head. And so then because of the elongation, there were spaces in between all the molars. So spaces in between here. So what's getting stuck in there when she's trying to eat? Hey, it's fermented, it stinks because she can't get it out. It was sad to watch her try to graze because she was trying to graze. And it was heartbreaking. And I'm furious because people are racing her, and so there's those cases out there. But there's most of the time, if it's just an overjet, that's not a big deal. But if it's a big overbite, and it's set up like this, like she was, that is a really big deal. That is absolutely not functional.
Is that something you can catch early and then, or it's
There's
just
nothing you can do about it.
that?
That's how they're built. So could she have, if she'd been having her front teeth done the entire time, that would have been helpful for her to be able to at least move her head better. But still, that wouldn't have helped the spacing in the back either as far as what she was eating. And I run into that a lot because with the body, you can see that. With the feet, you can see that. You cannot see the teeth. You cannot see what's going on. So people, it seems like teeth are the last place that people think about when there's body issues or temperament issues or feeding issues, they think about it more. But usually not until they're ready, Yep.
We brought in a Mustang, a yearling, for training.
Mhm.
She had a severe parrot mouth.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up finding her a really good home where they're maintaining her dental health. But to think about that horse in the wild, if she would not have been gathered,
She wouldn't make it very long.
right?
Genetically in the wild, if there's something wrong, they're not going to make it very long.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was almost, because she was so young, it was almost like she didn't have bottom teeth, right?
She did, but
They were so, they weren't
yeah,
formed.
Same thing.
cleared like
Yep.
like
Same
Yeah.
thing.
And they
Yep.
weren't formed right because they, what you were saying with masticating, and that's
Yeah.
how it stimulates the root to grow.
Right.
It
Right.
wasn't grown
Their
properly.
bottom
Yeah.
teeth were really underdeveloped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was kind of,
Yeah.
it was interesting.
Well,
So-
and that was like this thoroughbred. I mean, she was like parts and pieces.
Yeah.
Like her molars, like when they're younger, they'll get the bump, the baby bump, and that's where the permanent teeth are trying to push out the caps. But this horse was 7, so her teeth were just that big, too big for her
Right.
physically.
First of all, I apologize for
Oh,
coming
no
in
problem,
late.
no
and
problem.
You might have covered this, so another apology.
No.
So, but, so with the parrot, the severe parrot mouth and the large molars and these dental issues, is it genetic?
Yeah, it came from somewhere. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so-
And then that's another thing. Look at the horse's teeth, for breeding.
Yes.
Like I had clients who had a stallion who had an overbite, and when I would go to do teeth at their place, I'm like, who's the daddy? Because then I knew I needed to have sharp blades, and it was going to take me a while if they hadn't had them done, from the time they're 5. So the longer you wait, the longer they grow. And that's why I'm saying with older ones, there's only so much I can do. There are some with huge diagonals, and I can only do enough to make them comfortable because there's not that much root base left anymore. So you think about them, they've been living with a headache their entire life because, they've got all these sutures in their head and they're shifted, and they have to learn how to move that way, and they have to learn how to work with what they have.
Is it possible that with the parrot mouth that genetically they're born that way, but it's made worse by lack of dental care
Sure,
or?
Sure. Because,
then
like,
the
say with the
overbite
bottom,
gets bigger.
say with the bottom, that's growing up in here, that can be pushing this out further, for sure. And if it's not dealt with, I've even seen, because a lot of people don't touch the canines. I've seen canine teeth digging into the upper lampus. And the same thing with those bottom teeth, they can be going up into their skin. So, yeah, for sure, not getting them taken care of. So, older horse, this is one of these horses. They don't have to look like that in domestication. Again, you know, part of that's muscling, and this is the best thing for this older horse to be on. Of course, some of them can't be on pasture. And then soak take pellets. I call it horsey oatmeal, it's soak take pellets. There's a lot of, people recommend senior feed. That has a lot of the other stuff in it, but they still need hay pellets soaked. And those are better than cubes because they break down easier and you don't have to worry about choke and that kind of stuff.
Are you saying this is one of the horses that had the?
No, this is
This is
just an older horse,
Okay.
showing what the condition can look like, but they don't have to look, I mean, sway back's a different story, but, the ribbiness. So here's another, example. So that's what you see a lot of the time, and a lot of the time people don't think, oh my gosh, I have to change the feed until they look like this. If I'm working on horses, I will tell people, okay, maybe in the next couple of years, you maybe think about switching over. And it's a good thing, honestly, once they turn about 20, to start giving them something soaked, because there are some, you know, just like anybody, they're eating hay their entire life, and then all of a sudden there's no hay and there's mush, and they're not gonna eat it, and they need to eat it. So it's better to transition them so that they are used to it once they get it. Hay, if there's no risk for choke, depending on the horse, I always recommend giving it for something to do, because that's what they've known their whole life, but then the nutrition is coming from the soaked hay pellets, and then whatever pre and probiotics you're gonna have. This guy, he looks pretty good. A lady came in, and he was a ranch horse, got his feet done, got his teeth done, got him on a good diet. So he's at least getting, you know, some weight on him before winter. And his teeth were in pretty bad shape, so I did what I could to get motion so he could be more comfortable and masticate a little bit better, whatever he had left. And this is another one. This horse is like 26. They can all look like that if we're feeding them correctly. These are my girls. So they become our responsibility in domestication. So to maintain proper motion and keep the proper balance to the TMJ, which is the temporomandibular joint, the horses need to have anterior, posterior, and then lateral motion. So the way that I look at my job is I'm removing obstacles to motion in the teeth. I'm not overtaking, because they only have so much to last their whole life. I'm just removing those obstacles so they can be as efficient as they possibly can. Here's another girl. That front tooth actually was pretty loose, the big one that's protuberant. And I don't know what happened to her. I don't know if she got kicked in the face or what had happened, or just genetically. But so you can see what this tooth is doing to the bottom. It's wearing that out. And so, and especially with that protuberant front tooth, there's no lateral motion. And if her mouth is shut, there's no anterior, posterior motion, because that tooth is holding the bottom in. So if you're riding and they're going downhill, they need to be able to slide past. I had a client come in because she got bucked off going down a hill, and she didn't know what was going on, so she brought the horse in for body work, and then we did the dental. And then the next time, she actually had her daughter ride the horse the next time because she was afraid of getting bucked off again. But she said, and he had an overbite. Not as bad as a parrot mouth, but he did have an overbite. So the next time they rode down a hill and they were out trail riding, she said he had an audible sigh because he could move. Nobody got bucked off. So I'm really bad, like when I go to things where people are riding horses that I'm thinking probably haven't been balanced. And you probably look at that with feet and how they're riding. How do they get away from that? There's two ways to get away from that, because they're gonna do whatever they can to protect their head. One is to open their mouth to get away from that. So if you see horses riding with their mouth open, it's either the bit, the hands, or the teeth that they're trying to get away from. So a lot of disciplines when they're shutting their mouth, what does that horse do? They have to come off their head somehow into their body, so they're going to overcompensate somewhere in their body to get away from the pressure in their head. Yeah.
So you've done my horse's teeth, so that's this is the reason why one of the first things you do is
Yeah.
move them,
Yeah.
their mouth out.
So what I look at initially are the temporal muscles. If they're even, great. So what we're looking for is symmetry, both sides. If one side is larger than the other, that means they're working harder on that side for some reason. Sometimes it can be just body, but a lot of times it's in the dentition. So the first thing I'll do is I'll check, and I'm listening. So I'm making sure their mouth is shut, and I'm moving them both ways. I'm feeling to see if there's a block, and I'm also listening. Are the back molars touching? And I can feel and hear if they're touching most of the time. If I haven't done them or somebody like me hasn't done them, they're not touching properly. All I can feel is the front teeth sliding. So that means these haven't been done or not done to where they need to be so that everything can touch. Because some people are uncomfortable with the sound that it makes, when I am motioning, but I like that sound because that means everything's touching properly. So,
What did you do for this guy?
I just brought this tooth way down, way back up to here. She eventually lost it, and then I had to even this out a little bit so there was better motion. And then it's like a crack in the hoof. If they have a crack, their feet continually grow. Their teeth do until they fall out. So if they're younger and they have something like this, eventually it will grow back up. So I have to, like if there's a diagonal, say there's a diagonal this way, that means the bottom on this side is too long and the top on this side is too long. So I'm going to take a little bit here and a little bit here. But if I take it all, which I never will, to the deficit, then you're gapping them somewhere else. So it's a balance. And like I said, if they're young enough, it will eventually come flush again to where it needs to be. So I always start with the front teeth. And this is her, and I'm working on that tooth. And then I move to the back. I have a lot of people who are horrified by the speculum because it looks like a Hannibal Lecter deal. That keeps me in fingers. So I like the speculum. There's no way to feel to the back of this tooth without having the mouth open like that. I only open to 2. That can open much further. I've gone to 3. I don't like to go to 3 because I don't like to put stress on the TMJ joint. And my hands are small. So I work with nitrile gloves with the fingertips cut out. So I can feel what I'm doing. Eyesight is deceiving sometimes. So I just feel what I need to work with. I always shut them down, give them breaks, open them, work on them again, because I'm trained to, I've had dental work. How does it feel when you're cranked open forever? Sometimes I feel like I can't even shut my mouth after that. And honestly, anytime you do a dental procedure, every horse is different. I do have some who are a little bit sore every time afterwards and need a little bit of Banamine. Because what's their natural reaction? To shut that thing. So they're pushing on that, and they have, their masseter muscles are very large. So some have an issue for a couple of days every time. Some occasionally, some never do. It just depends on the horse.
And is this horse sedated here?
Yeah, I work with sedation, not heavy sedation, but it's safer for me, it's safer for the horse.
Because I notice you're not using a stand.
Yeah,
So
no,
it's
I
pretty
like
lightly.
them to participate.
Yeah.
A lot of times I'm down on my knees if they're hanging their head. Sometimes I'm at their butt if they turn their head all the way around. One time I was laying on the ground. So it just depends, but I like to work with them. So, multitude of issues and injuries that can be from the mouth. They'll do whatever it takes to protect themselves. Jumpers. I've had jumpers refuse to jump or buck, or they can have girthiness issues, lameness, behavior. I mean, a multitude of issues can come from teeth. So I'm always going to say, balance the animal first before you get x-rays, before you do injections. A lot of the time, it's just they're not in balance, and those are 3 simple things that you can get done first, and then if there's a continued issue, then start delving into that kind of stuff.
How can the girthiness be linked to the mouth?
Well, and that can be more with temperament too. I had a trainer, she was missing a tooth, so the opposing tooth had grown up into the hole, and who knows when the last time the horse's teeth had been looked at. And so the trainer got the horse in, and she was really dull, so some are dull with pain, some are hypersensitive with pain, so she was really dull. So I balanced her mouth, and then she was a handful because she felt better. So that's more with like temperament and stuff. So sometimes I forget to say that. Well, you might feel really good now, so you may have a different horse. And literally they're all different with what injuries they can have from it. But it just seems like teeth are the last place that people think about doing it because they can't see them.
I do have a quick question too on the girthiness. If they have like ulcers, ulcers are stress. Stress held in your TMJ?
Sure.
So-
And or sharp edges,
Right.
maybe on the same side that your girth is.
So that could be also all connected?
And that's the thing, they're not textbooks. I mean, it's not textbook. Every single one is different. We used to try to think, well, okay, if they have this in the mouth, they must have this going on in the body. Well, some of them might, but some might not. So. And this just shows all the attachments. So, you can have tripping from incisors not being adjusted. You can have all kinds of issues. And that's the thing, balanced horse. Feet, teeth, spine, mind, tack, rider. I mean, you've got to have everything balanced. And that's a thing with trainers, with horses coming in. My husband used to ride for a living, and you think about that, well, and people like to blame trainers if things are not going right. Well, maybe they're not balanced, and the trainer can only get what they can get from the horse based on what the horse can do physically. My husband had a horse in, he didn't look great, he was ribby, but he was doing every single thing my husband was asking him to do. And but just he wasn't putting weight on. And the owner had mentioned that their vet had said, yeah, they probably need their teeth done. For a few years they've been saying this. So then we finally got the okay to do the teeth. Well, he was missing a tooth. He was missing this tooth here. This tooth, opposing it, grew up into the space that much. And then he also had a little bit of an overbite. It wasn't terrible, but he had back hooks like that too. So how's he gonna try to eat when he's got a tooth locked up in here? These are locked back here. And, you know, yeah, he can't, he's not efficient. But that just reminded me how forgiving they actually are. Because he was putting up with all of that. And he did everything he was asked to do with his head completely locked by his teeth.
We get in a lot of owner relinquishments because of behavioral issues, because of training issues. So the first thing that we do if it's a horse, especially that we're gonna put back into training
Right.
through saddle training,
Right.
teeth, chiropractic.
Yeah. I mean,
Nutrition.
those are the key
Yes.
points. I mean, and that's with us too. I mean, before we get injections, we should probably be balanced too. I mean, I probably should go to a dentist that balances my mouth better, you know?
Do you notice a difference in your work between, I mean, this is a total global question, but horses that are maybe on pasture 24/7 versus.
Depends on how much.
Yeah, like low energy, you know, healthy pasture, not overgrazing pasture.
Right.
But that more natural lifestyle where they're moving and eating and not getting grain meals or.
It's better, but for them to actually wear their teeth, they need hundreds of acres.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's better, and that's better for them mentally. That's better
Yeah.
for just overall. That's how they're supposed to be.
But I just wonder if you notice a difference in how the teeth wear in those situations.
Um,
but maybe that's just.
They are better. I think the worst ones I see overall, mentally, physically, teeth and body and everything, are ones who are show horses who are locked in a stall.
Mhm.
They're, you know, they create bad habits in there too, like wind
Yeah.
sucking or
Yeah, what comes
weaving
first.
or, you know, stuff like that. But, and a lot of people try to save their horse and not let them go out to pasture so they don't get hurt. Meanwhile, they're the worst ones as far as getting all that work done. Yeah, no, it definitely is better.
mean,
It depends
intuitively
on
that
the
makes
horse.
sense,
And
but
a lot
I'm
of
not
times
sure
genetically, it depends on the horse too. I was at a barn and I did two 26-year-olds. One was an Arab and one was a quarter horse. The Arab barely had any teeth. The quarter horse had all of its teeth. Same age, 26.
And same lifestyle, like
Yep.
same barn.
Yeah, so that was genetic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
So are you saying that those that are installed, like, if they're not hurt physically, then mentally they're hurt?
well,
With
it
the
depends
guidelines?
on the horse. I had a big appendix. He had an abscess in his foot, and we had to shut him in because the vet didn't want him moving. But he was big, and we had to put a plate. They completely took the sole out up to the coffin bone. We put a plate because he had veins running to the coffin bone of the abscess, and he was stalled. And he told me, the vet told me, you're lucky he didn't lose his mind because they're not supposed to be like that. You know, confined, and a lot of them end up mean. You know, I mean, we took turkeys to fair and we put them in a cage and had people poking at them. They were mean when we got them back. They were nice when we took them in. So yeah, I mean, I think mentally they're just not supposed to be like that. Maybe if they grew up that way, it would be less. But the horse is made to move. My vet also told me with babies, they need to be out and moving for their bones to grow properly. So I think a lot of it has to do with that too. I think when I used to work in an office cube, I think I was like that also. I much prefer being out and about.
I do have a question about wild horses on
Yes.
their ranges.
Right.
is that why they eat tree bark and sagebrush?
All the different things.
to
And they're also,
keep their teeth?
well, and maybe they're self-medicating
Right.
with what do I need for my stomach, or, you know, whatever. And with cribbing, some of it is stress, but like that horse with the parrot mouth, she's trying to fix herself by working on her mouth. I had worked with a thoroughbred who was 5, and the lady told me he was cribbing, and well, he had double rows of teeth. His baby caps had not come out, and the permanents were not right underneath them to knock them out. So he had sharp teeth. He had a double row of teeth. So he was trying to get his own baby teeth out. I mean, they're smart. I mean, they'll try to help themselves if they're not getting help. So this is just an example of riding downhill. This is one of my horses. She doesn't seem to know where her face is. She gets into fencing and rattlesnakes and all kinds of lovely things. And then this is an example of going uphill, probably, same thing. So downhill, they need to be able to slide, and then the same thing, uphill, it needs to be on the back. That's my baby Scarlet, and just an example of, they need to, you know, she's just out in pasture. She needs to be able to do that physically for whatever reason. So even if they're out on pasture, I recommend doing them at least every 2 years, you know, if you're not doing anything with them, because they still need to be able to move and function properly. So I just found that on Facebook, but that's a good example. Technically, the front teeth are too long, those very 2 front teeth in the middle, the incisors. You can see how long that canine is on the bottom. And then you can see the last incisor has a hook. So those are all things, the 2 front teeth that are too long are gonna hang out the anterior posterior. The canines can do the same thing, and then the hook is it, you know, you take those also. There's another example. It's a little bit of an overbite. And another thing that this is a hook. Another thing that the overbite is doing, depending on where it sits, it can be wearing off the front and the bottom teeth. She's actually in pretty good shape, her teeth. They're angled to go into the mouth. What happens when the top teeth are above over here, the bottom angle comes this way, and it wears off the front. And then when I come to work on them, I put the angle back in. So that's another thing I'm doing, I'm changing angles to where they're supposed to be. A lot of times they're getting flattened because they're so worried about the sharp edges. They take too much of where the edge is and they make them flat. You can tell she's angled. She's shorter out here and higher here. So I will go in and put those angles back in. And that's another reason sometimes if they haven't been balanced, it takes them a little while to figure out how to eat because they've had their angles changed. They've had the orthodontist in and fix that. And then so vice versa, on the top, it's higher on the outside, lower on the inside. And a lot of times they'll be flattened because again, they've overdone this so much because they're so worried about those sharp edges that they take the angles out of the teeth. There's a lingual edge. You can see it's gone into the gum in the top. And this entire tooth is protuberant, so it's worn out that upper tooth. Think about the disposition.
Did you take that picture?
No, that was one I found, yeah, no.
if you think about the pain that they're going through inside the mouth, and then you're on their back.
And if they're
asking them to
behaving
do
at all,
something.
oh my gosh.
These animals are just incredible, right?
Yeah, they are. I mean, they're so forgiving.
Do you run into infections where the holes are in the gum?
Yeah, sometimes. I don't typically run into stuff that's that bad, thankfully. But yeah, you probably won't. I always recommend, Novosan, doing Novosan flushes with mouths. So these are some of the pathology issues you can have. So there's a upright diagonal, there's a smile, which is kind of like that one where the front teeth were too long, and then this is opposite. These are called ramps on the front teeth, lower front, hooks on the top, and then just this would be a wave mouth. They also get the ridges on the surface. When they're young and the teeth have broken through the gums, those tend to be pretty sharp when they're younger, 2 or 3. And then this is like this girl here, I think is the one where she's missing the tooth. She's old. And then same thing, the bottoms are grown up into the holes. So again, when they're older, I'm not trying to make them completely flush because then I'm taking too much teeth away from the teeth that they have left, but I'm doing enough to get motion so that they can move properly. And then here's like accentuated sharp edge. So yeah, I'm gonna take that tip off, but I'm not completely gonna go crazy and make it flat because now I've just changed the way that they're made. This is, saying just taking the tip off. And there's like that paramount. That's what that horse looked like there on the bottom. So, I'm checking lateral motion to see what I'm dealing with. She actually is a cribber. And I was teasing, say, don't smile at your boyfriend because your teeth look terrible. Stop doing that. And she had a little bit of an underbite because she's wearing the top by windsucking or cribbing or whatever. So what's gonna happen here? These lowers, because there isn't anything to wear, are gonna grow up and hang in the upper. And there I'm working. So with a cribber, her fronts are short, but the side two are more normal. So that's really all I work with. I work with the bottom teeth and then the sides because they've already overdone it on their front teeth. I had a client who, and then I'm working on the molars here. I had a client who, typically it's once a year that you do teeth, depends on the horse. The only time I do more than once a year is usually a really young horse who's in really heavy work or show schedule. They will get noticeable growth back in about 6 months. We have people, unless they're older, if they're younger, up to about 16, 17, 18, depends on the horse, their teeth are still erupting pretty rapidly. When I have people say, oh, they don't need to be done for 2 years, and I'm like, well, they were probably overdone, and what would happen to the feet if you overdid them and didn't have to do them for 2 years? They'd be lame. It takes a while for the teeth to affect the body sometimes, but I mean, it's the same analogy. If you overdid them that much, you've taken too much. That's what I have to do with short ones. So large or small, in work or retired, they all need their teeth balanced. Again, if there are people who have a lot of horses, I say prioritize. Who are you riding? Who's younger? Those are the ones that should probably get the attention. If they're older or pasture pets, yeah, maybe we can do a couple of years unless they have terrible pathology, and then we do need to do it every year. I hear a lot of the time people talking about when they're older, we have to do them every 6 months. Well, their teeth are just coming out now. We need to be careful with what's left. So why am I gonna go in there and take more of what's already not there? You know, I'm gonna preserve what's there. And so what I tend to do is push them out. Let's do every 2 years. And eventually I say, you don't get to see me anymore, just feed oatmeal, you know. So just in closing, they're our responsibility to promote whole horse health. Remember to balance feet, teeth, and spine, and then if you're working with them, all the other stuff as well. Feed the horse on the ground. Again, the nets are great, but if they're on a wall or a fence, they're still creating body issues and teeth issues. And the feeders, when they're eating like this, you know, they're meant to eat this all the way through with all of their teeth. If they're eating like this, I find more pathology in the back because it all slides down and is concentrated in the back. So that's creating pathology that we've created. Have out on pasture as often as possible. And then that's another thing, when working with them, so they slice, they eat in a rotation. They don't eat like we do. They don't compress like we do. So again, working with them, I'm opening them this way. They can have a little discomfort from that. I try to do everything I can to not have that happen. But giving apples and carrots, don't give them a whole apple. They don't eat like we do. You know, cut it into small pieces because they eat like this, and the same thing with carrots. I see people giving whole and they're like this. They're not supposed to eat like that. So just thinking about how they are and how they've evolved. I had a client who had a ribby horse. So if they're older, that's either wormy or that's maldigestion. So I have people tell me all the time, well, they're getting the hay down. Well, they might be swallowing it, but that doesn't mean that it's been masticated to get the nutrition out of it like they should. Because they don't have the teeth to do that any longer. So when they're older, I mean, yeah, if it's a neglect case, probably haven't been wormed either. But most likely it's maldigestion because they don't have the teeth to be able to masticate the food. This horse, though, it was not her teeth. Her teeth were fine. It was her brain. She was just a worried horse. So, and then I've had really fat horses, and the people are like, oh, they don't need their teeth done, and they have big hooks, front and back. So you can still get lateral motion with hooks because they're just sliding past. And you can even get lateral motion if they're missing a tooth and the tooth has grown up in here. You can't get anterior or posterior, but you can get lateral because it will still slide through. So I've had people say, well, they were checked. Well, if they weren't checked with a speculum, you don't know what's in there. You know, every time I'm there, you have to put the speculum on and you have to check them. Because that fat horse maybe can't go downhill very well and is creating body issues